Okay, so I am going to probably annoy people and just use this because it's easier. This is a half-hour talk. It is meant to be a primer. So if you have an idea of what DDoS is and you do it professionally, this is going to be probably, well, it's going to be everything you already know. There are going to be some things that are technical in here, but mostly it's a, hey, this is what's going on in the industry in this way, and like, you should care about this, and you might want to think about this. There are 26 slides. I've got a half-hour slot. We're going to go fairly quick. The content isn't crazy. And at any point, feel free to heckle. So heckle, comments, questions, raise your hand, yell at me. I'm good. But the point is, like, yeah, that's fine. But, like, I'm happy to answer questions. Thanks. So the comment was nice beard. I need to get it trimmed. So packets are incoming. I liberally put some memes in here, but legitimately that's what we're going to go over. So we're going to go over basically, I think there's 3 or 4 slides at a high level global internet routing, which will annoy all the network people here because it's all accurate, but it's all high level enough that it gets you the information without all the detail. We're going to go over what distributed denial of service is specifically, because it means different things to different people. We're going to go over the fact that it's becoming larger and more common. And we're going to go over some of the mitigation techniques. And there's, I think, 4 slides, 5 slides on different kinds of techniques. You can do it a bunch of different ways. Question becomes, do you need to do it at all? So, moving right along, global internet routing. 2 or 3 points per slide. Legitimately tried to keep it to that. There's this thing called regional internet registrars. Basically, if you want your own IP space or your own ASN, or you want to be on the global internet routing table, you go talk to one of these entities. They control, this is the mandate by way of like the UN, by way of organization, that these guys get to delegate and control IP address ranges and resources. So go talk to Aaron. And for the love of God, if you can, stay in Aaron. The pricing is so much better than in other regions. The big things out of here, there's a thing called an ASN and a network prefix. An ASN is just a number. You get it. Basically, it's an autonomous system, which is a very fancy way of saying your company, your organization. You can have multiples. It's meant to be administrative control. So if you are such a large company that you have multiple different legal entities and multiple different controls in place, you might have multiples. Generally speaking, you're going to have one. And it's just a number. It's literally just a number. Network prefixes, subnets for people who don't talk network speak. An AS, this is the terminology because I'm going to be talking about it a little bit. An AS peers with another AS. So basically, handshake agreement. I'll send you some information. They send me some information. The information they send, networks advertise or announce routes. Colloquially, they're called routes. Technically, a route has more information than just here's the subnet. It actually has a bunch of other information along with that because it's important to know where that came from, right? So if I'm giving you, hey, here's this route, and you're like, great, thanks. I might have learned that in China or in London, and that might make a difference as to whether or not you want to accept it or not, or you want to do something different with it. So the basic idea is networks talk to other networks, they advertise routes, and there's stuff in the routes besides just the network prefix. The NLRI or the other stuff that's in the routes, it can control. It has the actual subnet, right? It can actually advertise. Notice I used the word advertise again. That's the whole thing of like it's one-way communication, basically being like, here's this stuff. And you have a handshake deal with all these different people. So anybody who accepted that handshake in the beginning will probably accept this information. They might not act on it, but they at least have it. It can have a bunch of other stuff in there, including MPLS labels, segment routing, flow spec, a few other things. The basic idea is you probably want to pass a subnet or a network prefix, more specifically, and some information along with it. So we'll get into flow spec a little bit more, but the notion is if you haven't heard of flow spec and you take one thing out of this talk, flow spec is a thing, and you might want to care about it if you're at all interested in this topic. It can also have path attributes. They can be extended. So the notion being that I learned this route in China. So remember that whole thing of like an AS peers with another AS? That just keeps going. And so me over in Winnipeg here, I'm going to learn my routes from, say, a local ISP. They're going to learn it from a regional ISP, and that regional ISP is going to be connected to the global routing table. And everybody's connected to the global routing table, but I want to understand my routes, where they're coming from. So I might get routes from Toronto, I might get routes from the States, I might be like, oh, hey, I can get to Google 3 different ways. Which way do I want to go? And there might be reasons why I might want to, go one way or another. All right. And this is the last slide, I think, on the global internet routing, because it's meant to be high level. It's accurate enough for the purposes of this. So I'm gonna, hey, look at that. Each network decides, the big point here is every network decides where to send a packet based on their own policy. So you don't get to control where you receive packets. You might, if you have one internet source and you plug into your ISP, well, obviously all your internet's gonna come off that thing. But if you're connected in multiple different locations and you're running networks, you don't get to decide where that happens. You get to influence the decision, but especially when you get into anycasting and other systems like that, basically, if you're in London, you might send your traffic one way. But if there's nothing stopping somebody from deciding, even though they're a local ISP to Winnipeg, to backhauling their transit to Australia and giving you the packet in Australia. And you don't get to control that. So it's important to note, because when we get into DDoS mitigation, you don't it's not trivial automatically to figure out what amounts to the back propagation. Because when a packet goes through the internet, every single point, it's making a forward routing decision. It's never making a reverse decision. And so you can have asymmetric paths. So I can think of it like Main Street, or this parking area here. I can go down a one-way street. Well, the traffic is not gonna come back the same route. And the same is true for the global internet table. So, denial of service is basically just disrupting it. There's a few different kinds. Most of the time, when people talk about a denial of service attack, they're most likely talking about larger things now. So HTTP 2 is a good one, excessive number of requests. So I can open a single TCP connection, and then inside that TCP connection, I can spam the hell out of, like, I request this, I request this, I request this. And from the networking perspective, it's a single TCP session that's already gone through all your load balancers, and it's hitting one machine. And then that server has to handle that, and it's a good way to avoid a lot of denial of service mitigations at the networking level if you just move up the stack, right? Most of the time when people talk about DDoS or DOS, they're talking about large numbers of packets and large amounts of bandwidth. The basic idea is, if you have an internet connection, I don't care how big it is, if somebody else has a bigger one, or you can create one that's bigger by using multiples. And then if you fill that pipe, you can't solve for that problem, other than some of the mitigations here, but you need other people's help. So you need to somehow tell your upstream ISP, hey, I don't want to see this traffic. And if they're nice, they'll say sure. But yeah, we'll get into it a little bit more. One thing is, they're targeted, literally free. Some darknet, Tammy, I haven't seen her today, but like, you can literally go onto some sites now and type in an IP address and hit go, and they will like denial of service it with a couple gig of traffic for free, because why not? If you pay $5, you can get into 10 gig range, like no problem whatsoever. And that's enough to knock out very small ISPs. It's worth noting they're very targeted though, as a result, right? So, oh, I don't like this Minecraft thing, right? Your kid is playing Minecraft and says, I don't want this server to exist anymore. That's a lot of where this comes from. And they're growing in frequency and severity. We'll get into the growing very quickly. Multiple networks and machines, DDoS, distributed. That's the basic notion. The big thing here, reflections and amplifications. So this is basically a one-to-many relationship. So if I can, and we'll get into spoof traffic as well, the amplifications usually require, the reflections require a spoofed packet. But the basic notion is, if I can pretend to be Bob over there, and I say to this thing, hey, give me the DNS for this domain, that request might take 50 bytes, 100 bytes, and the response to that is going to be like a kilobyte. That's a times 10 multiple. And if I faked being Bob, I go, hey, I'm Bob, give me that thing. There's going to be a kilobyte of data coming back that direction. to Bob when he didn't want it. And so you can do this at scale, flood the pipe. Big thing here is UDP, right? So Memcached famously, well, not famously, but a couple years ago had, I think it was a 50,000 to 1 amplification in there because they didn't secure stuff. So it doesn't take many Memcached servers that are reasonably connected to be able to get a one-to-many in a very brutally, yeah, you get the idea. It's a growing issue. So on the left, you're gonna see some numbers and timelines. These are, I was going through a whole bunch of talks, and those are the kind of ones that people were talking about at the time. And on the right is, this is Cloudflare, but like take your pick. There's other providers that give you really good information that's similar. But the notion is that these things are getting bigger. Unless you are buying multiple hundreds of gigs from your upstream transit provider, which I guarantee you, there's probably 2 or 3 people in this room who are, and you understand this stuff already, you can't withstand these attacks. And so we'll go into some of the mitigations as to why you might want to care about this, or why you might not want to, and you might want to lean on other providers to facilitate solving this problem for you. It's also worth mentioning before, that whole targeted thing depends on what you're doing. A random ISP that's doing home internet probably isn't going to be targeted that much, except for the random IP that is like, screw that guy, I don't like him playing Minecraft. But if you're running a site and you host content, you are likely to be targeted at some point for something, especially if it's user content. So, getting into this, I'm going off of stuff that was like a few months old now, but like 45 seconds of 7 terabit of traffic. So obviously it's distributed around the world, but many, many terabytes, terabit now. And about a decade ago, US banks had an issue where they got a little bit less than 100 gig thrown at them, and it took them down in 2013. This was Bank of America had an issue because they had multiple 10 gig pipes. Again, this is like a decade and a half old, so you know, you can look at the numbers and go, okay, people have beefed up their networks and stuff. But this is a problem that still exists, and it will continue to exist because there's no way to solve for a problem of, I want my service to exist and for everybody in the world to be able to get to it and not have to deal with the fact that that means anybody in the world can reach out and touch me, right? So that's another graph from Cloudflare. Again, big thing I wanted to flag here starts at 1 terabit. So this is happening, and it's going to continue to happen, and it's going to get pretty bad. Okay? Reflection, botnet traffic, and stressors. Exactly what this describes. So 1 packet in, you can use a botnet or not, you don't have to. But the basic idea is you trick a whole bunch of open resolvers, let's just say, or other UDP-based services that you can go a one-to-many, and you have that relationship where more data comes out than goes in. Then you can point it at a single system or a range of systems there. Yeah, and I did want to mention that stressor or booter services, there are a lot of them, and they are very cheap these days. So, spoof traffic. It's exactly what you would think it is. So, it's been an issue for a long time. It's still an issue. As a networking community, there's a bunch of people who are working really hard to try and get standards pushed to fix it. There are standards to fix this. It basically says, if you're an ISP or you're a network, when you take a packet, you shouldn't egress a packet unless it's from your network or it's from one of your customers that you have a good understanding about what that traffic came from. There's some standards for that. There's no obligation for networks to do this. And that means that for very large networks, think multinational backhaul across the Pacific, it's unreasonable for them to have a good understanding of all of the network traffic that's going between 2 different continents, right? So they're probably not going to do it. They're going to rely on the trust relationship they have with their ISPs, their clients. And that kind of percolates up. It's also, you know, if people are stupid or don't care, if you're apathetic, it's not going to happen. And that means that you can spoof traffic. So from my phone, I could send a piece of information posing as 1.1.1.1, or take your pick of any other service. And if I hit up some service, it'll reflect back to that source. Questions, comments, concerns. This is fairly basic stuff. I said primer and this is trend stuff, so, okay. Dead fucking room. Sorry. It's fine. Well, that's a plus. So, spoof traffic. I really enjoyed this. That is a fake blow-up car. I wanted to get a decent spoof traffic. That was the pun. I had to explain it, so I'm sorry. It's that bad. I was hoping to get like spoof traffic and have like a line of tanks or something, because that gets happen in war. But anyways, blow-up traffic. Fake sources. BCP38, and there's an RFC that go with it. There's a bunch of them. But the basic idea is, on the networking community side, if you run a network and you have a relationship with Aaron or any of the other RIRs, please, for the love of God, do the thing. Because you're contributing to it if you're allowing people to egress traffic from your network posing as somebody else. Stressor services. I mentioned there were a few. They're very much related to bulletproof hosting. They recently, not recently, but they do have an incestuous relationship with each other. The reason why I mention this is one of them got taken down a couple years ago, and it took down like 80% of the other ones because they were just reselling the other's service and taking like a 10, 15, 20% cut, right? So there aren't that many. And when you think about this, it makes sense because this requires you to have a decent internet connection egress. So most home consumers will pay for an internet connection. If you're paying on a business account, you might pay for a certain speed, and that'll be for inbound. You're probably not, these days, and people in the room, you're paying for a symmetric connection if you need it, and you understand what that means. But you're paying for transit at that point. You're paying for, take my packet that's destined for anywhere in the world, and you're gonna pay for that. Out of Winnipeg these days, it's gonna go like, I don't know, like $4,000 a month to $6,000 a month, depending on who you talk to, for the lowest bidder for 100 gig coming out of Winnipeg. That's a lot of traffic. That's 100 gig. But that's $4,000 or $5,000 a month Canadian coming out of Winnipeg. Europe's a lot denser, and there's a lot more traffic flowing around, but you also have better controls because they have a lot more communication between countries. So anyways, point is, these things exist. They're very much related to bulletproof hosting because if you're making sure that you can't get taken down no matter what, then you probably maybe you want to do this, and you can advertise as load balancing services. So now we're in the mitigations. I really liked that. I didn't create this. I found this, and I thought it was really accurate. There are certain levels of survival we are prepared to accept, and that very succinctly describes remotely triggered black holes. It literally completes the attack, but it saves the rest of your network, is the idea behind it. So if you have a machine that's getting DDoSed, an IP that's being DDoSed, there is a way to advertise to your upstreams, hey, anything coming down the pipe to me that's for that IP, just get rid of it, throw it away. And it means that you're not gonna see that traffic at all, which is great if you have a 1 gig pipe and that 1 gig pipe has previously been filled up with all of the traffic destined for that one IP that somebody's throwing at the door. But it completes the attack. So your network's up, but that one server, so that one user is literally just completely gone, as opposed to having great service. That's the notion. RTBH basically says upstream, hey, drop traffic for this. That's one way to deal with it. This is the tried and true standard way that this happens. And the reason it's tried and true and standard is it's one of the earliest versions of solving for this problem. It relies on stuff that already existed in BGP from a while ago instead of new versions of passing information. We're gonna get into the NLRI and FlowSpec. And I'm gonna speed this along too, because I've got just under 10 minutes. I think I'm halfway through. I wanna get through this because it's reasonable stuff. FlowSpec, basically BGP for firewalls. I offended everybody in the room that knows what I'm talking about. Bottom line is, it allows you to, using BGP, say, hey, I have some rules. I'm gonna propagate those rules. I'm gonna send those upstream or to my peers, and they're gonna apply them on their edge. So it's sort of like it's the same RTBH, but more specific, and allows you to basically take relatively rudimentary firewall rules and push them out, and that gets applied upstream. That's the notion. Missing, they didn't forward roll this. So there's a FlowSpec 2 coming. I think I've got a slide on that. But there are some things that aren't in FlowSpec that cannot be backported into FlowSpec because they didn't add in the notion of capabilities or extendability, right? So if you're building a protocol or you ever are dealing with like IETF and stuff, please, for the love of God, talk about this, because it's going to be used in some way you didn't expect, and you're going to want to forward roll this. That is exactly what I just described. So you basically say, oh shit, I'm getting DDoSed on my whatever. You send an announcement out the door. That service provider takes that and applies it. And it doesn't hit this link here. That's the notion. Notice that it's more specific. This is saying a specific IP. It's saying that's an IP protocol, that's a port, and the source. So you can do source, there's a few things on the next slide I think I'm going to go into. But it gives you more granularity than just anything destined for that IP, throw it at the door. Those are the things you can filter on right now with FlowSpec. So you can do certain things. You could sample it. So it allows you to keep stuff online a little bit better. It allows you to say, filter on, I'm getting a DDoS, and the DDoS I'm experiencing is actually on port 443, but it's all coming from Romania. That's weird. Or take your pick of any other country. I'm not picking on Romania in particular. You could do that if you were to give them source and destination prefixes. There's caveats to FlowSpec. Caveats to FlowSpec. If you have a single connection to your upstream, you can shoot yourself in the foot. You could apply FlowSpec rules to your own BGP connection, and then suddenly you're offline. That's a problem. You can also cause things to fail. So 2013, Cloudflare had an issue where they accidentally had a FlowSpec rule, and that FlowSpec rule was matching packets with a certain amount of, notice the previous slide, packet length is here. So it's really useful because you might have a lot of really small packets coming at you, right? They messed up and they typoed and resulted in that. So they matched really high, big packets. Their networking gear couldn't handle it and kernel panicked. That's a pain in the ass to figure out. It's also not possible to solve for because if it reboots, it gets the next FlowSpec rule from wherever you're generating these FlowSpecs. Non-obvious device limits. Routing gear is going to keep doing routing gear stuff until you ask it to do something that it can't do, and then it'll fall down in weird ways. This allows you to ask it to do stuff dynamically, so you can shoot yourself in the foot. FlowSpec v2, big thing here, payload matching and support for layer 2 and redirecting. So there are some services that I'll get into later on that allow you to take in traffic and send them somewhere else. This would allow you to do that and tell your ISP upstream, hey, I have a 1 gig connection here. I don't want you to send the traffic this direction. I want you to send the traffic over there. Which, again, useful on demand. I'm almost done, I swear. Okay. And we got 5 minutes, so this is good timing. So you can automate the thing. Notice how, so really roughly speaking, if I have a connection coming in and I have a sensor, I'm doing what amounts to a TCP dump, not actually, but close enough, I can go, hey, this thing's being DDoSed. Well, if you detect that, you can then send in, using BGP, a FlowSpec rule or a BGP drop, that kind of thing, right? You can automate it. That's great, awesome. It allows you to do terabits on a single server is what they advertise. Legitimately it does, because instead of sending the content, you can have a single server that just sees the headers of the packets coming in. So you could have multiple 100 gig links and only be generating a couple hundred megabit of traffic, because all you're doing is every single packet that comes in, you're copying the headers of that packet and making a decision as to whether or not you need to do something. FastNetMon is a commercial product. They also have I'm not sure, I think they have you can use it for free. I don't know, yeah? Community Edition, there you go. I mention it because it is the standard way to do this these days. There are other versions. You can script it yourself. But the point is, it's basically automatically detecting stuff coming in, oh shit, and then acting on it. And it does that by advertising BGP. There are scrubbing services. These sit in front of your network. Basically, they have a massive amount of bandwidth, hundreds of terabit these days. They can absorb all the shit that gets thrown at you, and then they give you a clean thing out the back. You can do the same thing and have TLS termination here, which allows you to do certain other things. Like you probably want to build in a WAF product to that. You probably want to build in, caching and a CDN on that. There's some people from Fastly in the room. Go talk to them. They allow you to do customization when they're on that. Point is, there's a few different vendors. that allow you to push rules out the door and have it run at the edge of a network that has hundreds of terabit of traffic so that you can't handle it. There's no way you can. I think 3 slides left. You care about where you're advertising it. Not all ASs are equal. Not all ISPs are equal. Some of them charge for flow spec, some of them don't. If it's never up, you don't have a problem. You can throw a server at it. This is getting nice and cheap. 10K gets you roughly a little over a terabit of actual network now, just from used stuff. 100 gig NICs. You can throw ungodly amounts of money at it. By that I mean take your pick of, commercial hardware vendor that is literally the same thing. Plug in the network here, your network comes out here. They do the same thing that Fastnet Mon does. Gives you a nice GUI. And I think that's it. That's all I'm going to leave you with. Questions, comments, concerns? I think we're at time.
Yeah, you're right there. We got time for a question or two. Anyone? Right here.
Invariably, the news catches on to this, and all of a sudden, this website has been hacked. It's down. DDoS is hacked. It's not hacking though.
Yeah, so the comment was DDoS is not hacking. Yeah, I mean, sure. Depends on what you're solving for. If my bank is DDoS and I can't wire transfer my rent, I'm going to fucking care. That's the simple answer. I don't care if it was hacked. I care whether or not I can do the thing. But you're right. My information isn't gone. So.
Yeah. And the reputational damage is the same too, right? It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah, so the question was, if you're running an authoritative DNS server and you don't want to be part of the problem, what are the steps you can take? There are some standard ones. I didn't link to them in this deck, but basically, the simple answer is there are some standard configurations that are built into most resolvers, and just use them. So that can enable, you can force TCP is a very simple one. It's also considered rather aggressive. There are some other ways to limit it where the one-to-many relationship, the relationship, the ratio of your request to response, if it exceeds a certain threshold, don't do it, and that limits it a little bit. The other big one that everybody suggests is, honest to God, just rate limiting it. Because if you do one-off, if somebody spoofs the traffic and uses your open resolver, no big deal once in a while. If they're doing that all the time, you know right away that you're not asking for that domain over and over and over again, just stop. So that's the big one, it's just rate limiting the requests coming in the door per IP.
Excellent, thank you very much.